Hello and welcome to part two of the program evaluation mini lecture. Hope everybody is doing well. Once again, I'm joined here by my co-teacher, Leo, who's here for quality assurance purposes. So hopefully he won't get in the way too much during this little chat here. So we're going to pick up where we left off. So let me share these slides. And so in part one of this lecture, we discussed logic models. And logic models have four basic parts: conditions, activities, outcomes, and impacts. And today we're going to tie these stages of a logic model in with stages of evaluation. So this is how logic models become important. It's so sometimes I think they're a little bit they can be a little bit abstract, and so we're talking about these abstract concepts. But this is where the abstract concepts actually guide concrete decision making. So each of the stages of logic model, so conditions, activities, outcomes, and impacts, coincide with different stages of program development. So conditions, how do you know what the conditions are? Well, oftentimes you need to do a needs assessment. Once you have your needs assessment, what activities do you need to do? Well, you need to plan those activities. Also, then you need to implement those activities. And then how do we get to the outcomes and the impacts? Well, we have to evaluate those things. So again, these logic models, despite them being somewhat abstract, they are linked to very specific concrete actions that you take on when you design a new program. And so what I'm going to talk about is an ideal situation here. This is not always how it works in the real world, but if given a choice, this is how I would prefer things to work in the real world. When a program is being created, oftentimes you want that program to be informed by a systematic needs assessment. So a needs assessment is just what it sounds like. It's a study of whether or not there is a need for a new program or intervention. So what a needs assessment basically does is it gives you information about the conditions. And so if you want your program to be relevant, as we said last time, your activities need to map onto the conditions that help cause or bring about the problem. So using a systematic needs assessment to figure out what those conditions are is ideal. And your design and implementation of a program arise from both your understanding of the need of the conditions, but also experience with the intervention and knowledge of what types of intervention have been effective. So you need to balance the science with the context. So there's, earlier in the semester I drew kind of a Venn diagram. On one side we have generalizable science that tells us what works, and on the other hand we have the community context, and what we want to do is make sure that our program considers both of those things. Let me move this, sorry. The other ideal situation is that you start the evaluation plan when you start the intervention, so it gets cooked into the actual intervention. Oftentimes I'm asked to come back in and do an evaluation of a program after it's been running for a while. Those can be pretty tricky because people have established expectations of what their job is and what they're supposed to be doing and what data get collected. And then when you come in and afterwards and try to collect new data or change the way things are worked, it can be pretty difficult because people are used to doing what they're doing. When you when you build in the program evaluation from the beginning, the evaluation becomes part of the program itself. The other reason this is good is oftentimes you need to collect data at the beginning to measure change. So you need a baseline, right? So what are the conditions before this program is enacted? So when we measure it later after the program is enacted, we can see if there's any differences because of the program. And so, as I just mentioned, it tends program evaluation tends to be easier when it's designed at the same time the program is developed. And so the things you need to keep in mind here are the match between the problem theory and the program theory, and how you're going to measure that problem based on the program. And so I'm going to skip the part about ribbon campaigns as an example, and we'll talk about some examples in a minute. But like I said, oftentimes I'm asked to do program evaluations after a program has already started. So when you're evaluating a program that's already in existence, you need to examine assumptions that may not already be articulated. So oftentimes when I'm asked to do a program evaluation, one of the first questions I ask is, well, what is it exactly that your program's supposed to do? And you know, when I first started doing this work, I was surprised at how difficult a lot of people, how difficult a time people had answering that question. Like, what is it that you're hoping for? And the answer was often, well, you know, we want this situation to be better, or we want these kids to be better. But you need, again, to operationalize those things. And so, again, this is where logic models come in handy. This is where the logic models help guide that process. So oftentimes, you know, it's after the fact, but I start a program evaluation by having the program developers or owners to walk through the logic model to articulate what their program is meant to do, and to get them thinking about what kind of evidence would be required to demonstrate the effectiveness of the program. And so to further branch off of this logic model, so we have logic model, conditions, activities, outcomes, and impacts. We've got program development, so needs assessment, program planning, implementation, and evaluation. And then more specifically, we get into the evaluation itself. So number one, what I just mentioned, we need to articulate what the goals and the expected outcomes are going to be. Step two is a process evaluation. So that basically measures who is doing what with whom. Step three is an outcome evaluation. So what are the results? And step four is an impact evaluation. And that is, what is the broader impact of this program or this intervention on the community? And so I'll walk through those steps. So step one is identifying goals and desired outcomes. So what the project is striving for, and what targets are supposed to be measured. So, sorry, there's some traffic going by here on my road. So, what are the goals? Who are the target groups? You know, what are their demographic groups? Are there developmental transitions that we're targeting? Are there individuals with particular risk factors? Is there a particular locality or geographic location that we're targeting? And then what are the desired outcomes? And so these need to be clearly defined, specific, realistic, attainable, measurable. So you may be familiar with these from another class. These are often referred to as SMART goals. and particularly behavioral indicators are nice when we're thinking about evaluation plans. Step 2 is a process evaluation. So process evaluations are intended to monitor program activities. So they organize the program efforts. They ensure that all the parts of the program are being conducted as planned. So this is part of a process evaluation is often referred to as a fidelity assessment. Are we being true to the model, to the intervention the way it was, and delivering it the way it was intended? Are we effectively using program resources when they are needed? And so this process evaluation does a couple of things. Number one, it provides an index of accountability. So it's useful for administrators, funders, directors. These are data that demonstrate that we're doing what we said we would do, right? That we're meeting these people this number of times, we're doing these interventions, and it's taking this much time or this much money. And process evaluations are often overlooked, but they're really important to determine what works about the program and what might not work so well. So oftentimes when I have outcome evaluation and I see things in the data that I don't expect, I go back to the process evaluation data to see if I can find some answers. And so these help to answer questions about was it a theory failure or was it an implementation failure? Is our problem theory and our program theory inaccurate, or are we just not doing this intervention with the right amount of intensity or duration, or is there something about our target group that's not working? This also determines when an outcome evaluation should start. So generally, you want to do outcome evaluations after the program has been implemented. So the only way to know that a program has fully been implemented is to do a process evaluation. And really, once we know that who we're doing something with, what exactly we're doing, who's doing it, how often they're doing it, then we can determine whether we're ready to undertake an outcome evaluation. It also keeps track of changes in conditions that affect implementation. So it's really good for diagnosing problems or hiccups with a new program. And so here's what you're measuring. What were the intended and actual activities of the program? And we'll take a mentoring program as an example. So who was supposed to do what with whom and when was it done? That's sort of the question that process evaluation answers. So for mentoring, who were the mentors? Who delivered services? How many mentors did we have? What were the mentors' qualifications, etc.? What did the mentors do? What did they actually do? Did they take kids just to go get ice cream, or did they do some active tutoring and role modeling and have discussions about study habits and things like that? So what was the actual intervention? Whom? What kids got mentors? What kids participated? Did the kids who participated match up with who the target group was? When? So how, the time, the setting, the dosage. How often did mentors see their kids? Was it weekly? Was it a couple times a week? Was it once a month? What were the expectations and what actually happened? And then finally, to what extent? So to what extent were the target goals met? So say my mentoring program, I wanted mentors to have weekly meetings with their mentees that were at least 1 hour long, where they discussed at least one topic of some substance, whether it be things about academics or relationships or social media or whatever my target topics were. So how often did that happen? what percentage of my mentors actually did hold weekly meetings, and what percentage of them actually did tackle one of those topics in each of those meetings. So this is process evaluation is evaluation of the process of the program. So it's what happens during the program. Outcome evaluation assesses the proximal effects of the program. So we use outcome evaluations to determine how effective a program was. And so, again, these should be planned at the beginning of the project, not added on later if you can at all help it. And more this, this didn't used to be the case. I think more and more it is the case because now funding agencies want to see that plan before they give you money. An outcome is meant to answer the question, did it work? So oftentimes outcome measures rely on self-report questionnaires, maybe parent or teacher ratings if we're working with kids, ratings from what we call key informants, so people who are sort of in the know about a particular issue, or behavioral indicators. So any observed changes in behavior we can measure. And so where outcome measure focus on the participants in the program or the intervention and whether or not the program worked for those participants, impact evaluations are a little bit broader. So these concern the ultimate effects desired by the program, and it usually takes a wide view of the program. So what are the long-term effects? So for example, reduction in overall drug use or new cases of drug use. So with my fictional mentoring program, we might hypothesize that that mentoring reduces the amount of drug use among mentees, and if we have a big enough program and enough mentees, we might see drug use decrease in the community as a whole. So where an outcome measure might be whether or not our participants were using drugs, an impact evaluation might look at whether there were fewer drug arrests for adolescents in the community as a whole. So again, outcome impact is whether it worked for the participants. Outcome evaluation is whether or not it worked for the participant. Impact evaluation is what kind of an impact it had on the community as a whole. And usually to do impact evaluation requires archival data, so data that's collected in the course of some other activity. So court records, police records, school grades, attendance, medical records, those aren't necessarily things that we would collect explicitly for our program, but they can show a program's impact on the community as a whole. And so, so for this week, your short video and your reflection is going to be to contrast some of these things. So particularly contrasting process evaluation and outcome evaluation. Individuals or students in my class often struggle knowing the difference between a process evaluation or articulating the difference between a process evaluation and an outcome evaluation. So I'm going to give a little bit more focus on that in my short video that should come out Monday or Tuesday for your activity that will be due next Sunday. So look for that soon. Again, just to reiterate one last time, process evaluation is evaluating what was done, and outcome evaluation is evaluating whether or not that stuff that was done actually worked to address the problem. And impact evaluation looks at the the effect of the program on the broader community as a whole, in terms of a community perspective. So that's all I have for this lecture. I'm looking forward to seeing some of your questions about it, and I'll again look for that short video to appear on Monday or Tuesday. Y'all take care, stay safe.